Coming live from the studio, this is All Sports with Gerardo. Thank you for watching another episode of All Sports. This is your host Gerardo, and all I talk is sports. On the show today, I am going to talk about Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and Nhl Hockey. Before I start the show, I hope you all had a great week. To start off with Major League Baseball, during the White Sox-Pirates game on Tuesday, August 25th, Lucas Giolito threw a no-hitter against the Pirates. Lucas Giolito threw 9 innings, only walking one batter while striking out 13 batters and allowing no hits. Lucas Giolito's no-hitter was the 19th no-hitter in White Sox history, and his 13 strikeouts was the most by a White Sox pitcher who threw a no-hitter. So one great thing about the 2020 Major League Baseball season was that there was a no-hitter, and to add on to White Sox history, the White Sox added another no-hitter to their history. So at least there was one great thing about the 2020 Major League Baseball season, was that there was a no-hitter in the 2020 season, and a White Sox pitcher threw a no-hitter, which added on to the history for the White Sox. The Major League Baseball trade deadline was on August 31st. So here are some of the trades that happened before the Major League Baseball trade deadline. Even with this 60-game season in the 2020 season, there was still a trade deadline. Usually it's on July 31st, but in this 60-game season, this trade deadline was on August 31st. And since this was only a 60-game season and it's not a long season like it usually is, there really wasn't a whole lot of trades that happened, but there were still some trades that happened. So here are some of the top trades that happened before the trade deadline. The Indians traded pitcher Mike Clevelinger to the Padres. The Diamondbacks traded Starling Marte to the Marlins. The Diamondbacks traded Archie Bradley to the Reds. The Red Sox traded Kevin Pillar to the Rockies. The Rangers traded Todd Frazier to the Mets. The Diamondbacks traded Robbie Ray to the Blue Jays. The Marlins traded Jonathan Villar to the Blue Jays. The Brewers traded David Phelps to the Phillies. The Rangers traded pitcher Mike Minor to the Athletics. The Angels traded Brian Goodman to the Reds. The Orioles traded pitcher Miguel Castro to the Mets. The Dodgers traded Ross Stripling to the Blue Jays. The Mariners traded pitcher Taylor Williams to the Padres. The Tigers traded Cameron Maybin to the Cubs. The Rays traded pitcher Anthony Banda to the Giants. The Diamondbacks traded pitcher Andrew Chafin to the Cubs. The Orioles traded pitcher Marcel Givens to the Rockies. The Red Sox traded Mitch Moreland to the Padres. The Rays traded Jose Martinez to the Cubs. So the majority of the trades that happened before the trade deadline were pitchers. And even though the majority of the trades were pitchers, there were still some position players that also got traded. But everyone knew with this short 60-game season, there wasn't going to be a whole lot of trades. But even in this short 60-game season in the 2020 season, some trades still happened, even though it wasn't really big-name players and it wasn't a lot of trades like it usually is. But the teams that are contending for a playoff spot definitely made some trades to improve their team so they can get into the playoffs when this season comes to an end, since this is a 60-game season in the 2020 season. But also, more teams have a chance at making it into the playoffs since the playoffs were expanded in the American and National League. On Monday, August 31st, Hall of Fame pitcher Tom Schaefer passed away. He was 75 years old. So right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Rockies. I'm going to tell you every team the Rockies went up against in the last week and the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Rockies go up against in the next week. So to start off, last week the Rockies had a 4-game series against the Diamondbacks down in Arizona. In the final game of the series, this game was postponed and it will be made up the next time the Rockies go down to Arizona, which will be the final series of the 2020 season later on this month. The first game of that series will be a doubleheader when they make up the final game of this previous series. But in this Rockies Diamondbacks series, regardless of the outcome of this game later on this month, the Rockies did win this series since they have won 3 out of the 4 games from the Diamondbacks. This past weekend, the Rockies returned back to Coors Field to open up their homestand. And over the weekend, the Rockies had a 4-game series against the Padres here at Coors Field. In the first game of the series, the Rockies lost the game 10-4. In the second game of the series, the Rockies won a close game 4-3. In the third game of the series, the Rockies lost the game 13-2. And in the final game of the series, the Rockies lost the game 6-0. So overall, the Rockies did not win this series, and they were only able to win 1 game against the Padres. This past week, the Rockies had a 2-game series against the Giants here at Coors Field to continue their homestand. In the first game of the series, this is a game the Rockies are not going to want to remember. The Rockies lost this game 23-5. And in the final game of the series, the Rockies won the game 9-6. So overall, the Rockies were able to win 1 of the games from this series. And with that first game, the Rockies definitely want to forget about that game and not even remember that game since they lost 23-5. But at least the Rockies were able to bounce back in the next game of the series, which was the final game of the series, and win this game 9-6 to forget about what happened in that first game of the series. This weekend, the Rockies hit the road and they head down to Los Angeles to go against the Dodgers in a 3-game series. And then next week, the Rockies will continue their road trip down to San Diego and go against the Padres in a 3-game series. So that's the current schedule for the Rockies. That's the teams the Rockies went up against in the last week, and that's the final scores of those games. And that's also who the Rockies go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you with the current Major League Baseball standings in the American and National League. To start off in the American League East, right now the Rays are leading this division at 26 games, and the next closest teams are the Yankees and the Blue Jays. They're sitting at 20 games, and they're 5 games back from the Rays. In the American League Central, right now the Indians are leading this division at 23 games. The next closest team is the White Sox. They're sitting at 23 games, and they're only half a game back from the Indians. Also, the Twins are contending for the division. Right now, they're sitting at 22 games, and they're only a game and a half back from the Indians. In the American League West, right now, the Athletics are leading this division at 22 games, and the next closest team is the Astros. They're only sitting 2 games back. In the National League, In the National League East, right now, the Braves are leading this division at 22 games, and the next closest team is the Phillies by 2.5 games, and they're sitting at 18 games. In the National League Central, right now, the Cubs are leading this division at 22 games, and the next closest team is the Cardinals, and they're sitting 3.5 games back from the Cubs. And in the National League West, right now, the Dodgers are leading this division at 29 games, and the next closest team is the Padres by 6 games, and they're sitting at 23 games. So that's the current Major League Baseball standings in the American and National League. In the Major League Baseball Power Rankings, the current top 10 Major League Baseball teams are the Dodgers, Rays, Athletics, Indians, Padres, White Sox, Twins, Yankees, Cubs, and Braves. Moving on now to NBA basketball, Serge Ibaka moved into 8th in all-time blocks. LeBron James moved into 1st in playoff points, and he surpassed 7,000 career playoff points. LeBron James has a 14-0 career record in the first round of the playoffs. During LeBron James' career, every time he has made it into the playoffs, regardless of what team he has played for, LeBron James has never lost in the first round of the playoffs. Giannis Antetokounmpo joined Egan Baylor as the only players to average 30-plus points, 15-plus rebounds, and 5-plus assists in a NBA playoff series. Kawhi Leonard became the first player since Gary Payton to record 30-plus points, 10-plus rebounds, 5-plus assists, and 5-plus steals in an NBA playoff game. Lou Dort joined LeBron James and Kobe Bryant as the only players 21 or younger to score 25-plus points in a Game 7. Jamal Murray is the first player to drop 40-plus points in back-to-back playoff games without a turnover. Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell joined Michael Jordan and Allen Iverson as the only players to drop 50-plus points multiple times in a playoff series. Jamal Murray joins Michael Jordan as the only players in postseason history with 3 straight 40-point, 5 rebound, and 5 assist games. Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell combined to score 475 points in the Nuggets-Jazz series, and that is the most combined points by opposing players in a series in NBA history. Jamal Murray and Donovan Mitchell joined Steph Curry and Klay Thompson for having the most three-pointers made in a playoff series. Donovan Mitchell's 33 three-pointers in the first round of the playoffs is the most three-pointers made in a single playoff series. The Nuggets became the 12th team in NBA history to make a 3-1 series comeback in the playoffs. In the first round of the Western Conference playoffs, the Nuggets went against the Jazz and they defeated the Jazz in 7 games. So regardless of what team you root for, but especially if you're a fan of the NBA, this Nuggets-Jazz series was a great series in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs for this season, since this season was able to resume. And especially if you're a fan of the Nuggets or the Jazz, this was a must-watch playoff series, especially since your team was playing in the playoffs. But regardless if you don't root for these teams, but especially if you're a fan of the NBA, regardless of what team you root for, if you're someone that likes playoff basketball, this Nuggets-Jazz series was a must-watch playoff series. And this was a great playoff series, and it went all the way to Game 7. Now, when the Jazz were up 3-1 against the Nuggets, everyone thought this series was over, especially with the way that the Jazz were playing against the Nuggets and how they were winning games. And all the Jazz had to do was win one more game and they were going to move on to the second round of the Western Conference playoffs. But the Nuggets, they had other plans. And even though it's hard to come back from a 3-1 deficit, the Nuggets came together. In every game that the Nuggets played, they were able to win those games and come back from a 3-1 deficit. And by the end of Game 6, this series was tied at 3. And when it came to Game 7, let me tell you something. That Game 7 was a great Game 7 between the Nuggets and the Jazz. And it went all the way down to the end of the game. And somehow, even though the Nuggets played really good basketball in the first half of Game 7, but they didn't play that great in the second half of Game 7, the Nuggets were still able to hold on to win Game 7. And they were able to knock off the Jazz to move on to the second round of the playoffs in the Western Conference. Now, with the Nuggets moving on to the second round of the playoffs, they are going against the Clippers. And that's not going to be an easy series for the Nuggets. We'll have to wait and see if the Nuggets can win a game against the Clippers, but especially win the series against the Clippers. That's going to be a challenge for the Nuggets because the Clippers was one team that the Nuggets had a hard time beating during the regular season. Even the two Los Angeles teams, which includes the Clippers and the Lakers, the Nuggets had a hard time beating those two teams. And the Nuggets are the third seed. And the two teams they had a hard time beating are the number 1 and 2 seed in the Western Conference, which would be the number 1 seed Lakers and the number 2 seed Clippers. We'll have to wait and see if the Nuggets can beat the Clippers and move on to the Western Conference Finals. But regardless of what happens, it was great to see that the Nuggets were able to come back from a 3-1 deficit when everyone thought that series was over. And all the Jazz had to do was win one more game to move on to the second round of the playoffs. And the Nuggets were able to come back, take the Jazz to Game 7, and win Game 7. And regardless if it's the NBA or other leagues, there are not that many teams that are able to come back from a 3-1 deficit to win this series. And the last time that happened in the NBA was back in 2016 during the NBA Finals, when the Cavaliers were able to come back from a 3-1 deficit against the Warriors and take the Warriors to Game 7 and win Game 7 to win the NBA Finals. That tells you right there, regardless if it's the NBA or a different league, not too many teams are able to come back from a 3-1 deficit. And the times it has happened, it doesn't happen often. But the Nuggets were able to accomplish something big, regardless if the Nuggets beat the Clippers and move on to the Western Conference Finals. It'll be great to see the Nuggets move on to the Western Conference Finals. But regardless of what happens in that Nuggets-Clippers series, it was just great to see how the Nuggets were able to come back against the Jazz after being down 3-1. Take the Jazz to Game 7, win Game 7, and move on to the second round of the playoffs in the Western Conference. So if you're a Nuggets fan, you definitely need to watch the Nuggets now that they are playing basketball in the playoffs, and they're now playing in the second round of the playoffs against the Clippers in the Western Conference. And regardless if you're a Nuggets fan or not, but especially if your team is playing in the playoffs, regardless of what team you root for, you definitely need to watch the playoff games. No matter what team you root for, they are must-watch games. And let me tell you something. If you haven't watched any of the games, you are definitely missing out. But if you've watched some of the games, most of the games, or all of the games, they have all been great basketball games. So if you're watching the NBA games now that they are in the playoffs, continue watching those games. And if you haven't been watching those games, start watching those games. Those NBA games are must-watch games. And they've all been great games. And a lot of those games have also come down to the wire. Giannis Antetokounmpo was named the 2019-2020 NBA Defensive Player of the Year. Brandon Ingram was named the 2019-2020 NBA Most Improved Player of the Year. Ja Morant was named the 2019-2020 NBA Rookie of the Year. Nick Nurse was named the 2019-2020 NBA Coach of the Year. The Nets hired Steve Nash to be their next head coach. Steve Nash and the Nets have agreed to a 4-year contract. On Saturday, August 29th, longtime NBA player and UConn star Clifford Robertson passed away. He was 53 years old. So right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Nuggets. I'm going to tell you every team the Nuggets went up against in the last week and the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Nuggets go up against in the next week. So to start off, in the first round of the Western Conference playoffs, the Nuggets went against the Jazz. And to start off with Game 4, Game 4 was on Sunday, August 23rd. And the Nuggets lost to the Jazz in a close game, 129-127. And at that time, the Jazz had a 3-1 lead over the Nuggets. Game 5 was on Tuesday, August 25th. And the Nuggets were able to beat the Jazz 117-107. Game 6 was on Sunday, August 30th. And the Nuggets were able to win that game 119-107. And Game 7 was on Tuesday, September 1st. And the Nuggets were able to win a close game against the Jazz 80-78. And the Nuggets were able to come back from a 3-1 deficit against the Jazz and win the series in 7 games. And the Nuggets are moving on to the second round of the Western Conference playoffs, and they will go against the Clippers. So now that the Nuggets have moved on to the second round of the Western Conference playoffs, the Nuggets are going against the Clippers in the second round. Game 1 of the series was on Thursday, September 3rd. And in Game 1, the Nuggets lost the game to the Clippers 120-97. Right now the Clippers have a 1-0 lead over the Nuggets. Game 2 will be on Saturday, September 5th. Game 3 will be on Monday, September 7th. Game 4 will be on Wednesday, September 9th. Game 5 will be on Friday, September 11th. Game 6 will be on Sunday, September 13th. And Game 7 will be on Tuesday, September 15th. So that's the current schedule for the Nuggets. That's the teams the Nuggets went up against in the last week. And that's the final scores of those games. And that's also who the Nuggets go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you at the current NBA standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. So to start off with the Eastern Conference, in the first round of the playoffs, we had the Bucks go against the Magic, and the Bucks won the series 4-1, and they moved on to the second round of the playoffs. We had the Pacers go against the Heat, and the Heat won the series 4-0, and the Heat are moving on to the second round of the playoffs. We had the Celtics go against the 76ers. The Celtics won the series 4-0, and the Celtics are moving on to the second round of the playoffs. And we had the Raptors go against the Nets, and the Raptors won the series 4-0, and the Raptors are moving on to the second round of the playoffs. So in the second round of the playoffs, we have the Bucks going against the Heat, and as of right now, the Heat have a 2-0 lead over the Bucks, and we have the Celtics going against the Raptors, and as of right now, the Celtics have a 2-1 lead over the Raptors. In the Western Conference, in the first round of the playoffs, we had the Lakers go against the Trailblazers, and the Lakers won the series 4-1, and the Lakers are moving on to the second round of the playoffs. We had the Rockets go against the Thunder, and the Rockets won the series 4-3, and the Rockets are moving on to the second round of the playoffs. We had the Nuggets go against the Jazz, and the Nuggets won the series 4-3, and the Nuggets are moving on to the second round of the playoffs. And we had the Clippers go against the Mavericks, and the Clippers won the series 4-2, and the Clippers are moving on to the second round of the playoffs. In the second round of the playoffs, we have the Lakers going against the Rockets, and we have the Nuggets going against the Clippers, and in the Nuggets-Clippers series, right now the Clippers have a 1-0 lead over the Nuggets. So that's the current NBA standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. Moving on now to Nhl Hockey. So right now I'm going to update you with the current schedule for the Avalanche. I'm going to tell you every team the Avalanche went up against in the last week and the final scores of those games. And I'm also going to tell you who the Avalanche go up against in the next week. So to start off, in the second round of the Stanley Cup playoffs in the Western Conference, we have the Avalanche going against Dallas. In Game 1 on Saturday, August 22nd, the Avalanche lost to Dallas 5-3. In Game 2 on Monday, August 24th, the Avalanche lost to Dallas 5-2. In Game 3 on Wednesday, August 26th, the Avalanche beat Dallas 6-4. In Game 4 on Sunday, August 30th, the Avalanche lost a close game against Dallas 5-4. In Game 5 on Monday, August 31st, the Avalanche beat Dallas 6-3. And in Game 6 on Wednesday, September 2nd, the Avalanche beat Dallas 4-1. So as of right now, this series is tied at 3. Game 7 will be on Friday, September 4th. And we're going to have to wait and see who wins Game 7, which is hopefully the Avalanche. Whoever wins this game is going to win this series. And they're also going to move on to the Western Conference Finals. So hopefully it's the Avalanche. We're going to have to wait and see who wins this game. I really hope the Avalanche win this game because they will move on to the Western Conference Finals and have a chance at reaching and winning the Stanley Cup. But whoever wins this game will move on to the Western Conference Finals and have a chance at winning the Stanley Cup. So that's the current schedule for the Avalanche. That's the team the Avalanche went up against in the last week in the final scores of those games. And that's also who the Avalanche go up against in the next week. So right now I'm going to update you with the current NHL standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. So to start off in the Eastern Conference, in the second round of the playoffs, we have Philadelphia going against the New York Islanders. And right now, this series is tied at 3. And we had Tampa Bay go against Boston. And Tampa Bay won this series 4-1. And Tampa Bay is moving on to the Eastern Conference Finals. And we'll have to wait and see if Tampa Bay is going against Philadelphia or the New York Islanders. In the Western Conference, in the second round of the playoffs, we have Las Vegas going against Vancouver, and right now this series is tied at 3. And we have the Avalanche going against Dallas, and right now this series is tied at 3, and we'll have to wait and see what two teams will go against each other in the Western Conference Finals. So that's the current NHL standings in the Eastern and Western Conference. Moving on now to end the show, what to watch for this week in sports: the Rockies, Major League Baseball, the NBA playoffs, the Nuggets, NBA basketball, the Stanley Cup playoffs, the Avalanche, Nhl Hockey, NFL training camp, the Kentucky Derby on Saturday, September 5th. Moving on now, on the next show, I will talk about NFL football, Major League Baseball, NBA basketball, and NHL hockey. I hope you all have a great week. Tune in to the next All Sports with Gerardo show next week. I want to say thank you to everybody that listens to All Sports. Subscribe or like my pages on social media at All Sports with Gerardo. Until next time, this is Gerardo.